When people think of Michael Jackson, a few iconic images immediately come to mind: the glittering glove, the moonwalk, the piercing high notes, and the sheer magnetism that made him the king of pop. But if you ask Lionel Richie, one of Jackson's longtime friends and collaborators, there's another lesser known, and much funkier, detail about MJ's legacy. According to Richie, Michael Jackson stunk so much during his creative sessions with legendary producer Quincy Jones that Jones himself gave the superstar an unforgettable nickname, Smelly. Yes, the world's biggest pop star, who was famously soft-spoken, image-conscious, and obsessed with perfection, carried a secret quirk in the studio: he didn't exactly smell fresh. The origins of Smelly. Lionel Richie dropped the revelation with his trademark wit during a sit-down interview where he reminisced about the early 1980s, when he, Jackson, and Jones were often in the studio together. The trio famously worked on We Are the World in 1985, but even before that, Jackson and Jones had developed one of the most successful partnerships in music history with albums like Off the Wall, 1979, and Thriller, 1982. According to Richie, Quincy Jones, a man who never minced words, came up with the nickname as a direct response to Michael's, well, unique aroma. Michael didn't cuss. He didn't like using bad words. But when something impressed him, instead of saying, "That's funky," or, "That's dope," he'd say, "That's smelly." Richie explained. So Quincy just turned it right back on him: "You're the smelly one, Michael." And it stuck. What started as a lighthearted joke became an inside running gag in the studio. To Richie's amusement, Jackson embraced the moniker. He liked it. He actually giggled when Quincy called him that. Richie said, "Why did Michael Jackson say smelly instead of funky?" For those who knew Jackson personally, the story makes perfect sense. Michael grew up in a strict household under the watch of his devout mother, Katherine Jackson. Profanity was forbidden, and Michael carried that discipline into adulthood. Instead of blurting out slang like other musicians, Jackson invented his own cleaner lingo. Smelly became his replacement word for funky, dirty, or bad, in the complimentary sense. So, when he heard a bass line from Louis Johnson or a horn section arranged by Jerry Hay that blew his mind, MJ would clap his hands, throw his head back, and say, "That's smelly." Quincy, always quick with a joke, decided to flip the word back onto Jackson himself, especially since, during marathon recording sessions, Michael wasn't exactly known for smelling like roses. The studio reality, sweat, pressure, and music magic. Recording albums like Thriller wasn't a glamorous process. The sessions could last 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours straight. Jackson, a notorious perfectionist, often danced in the booth while singing, performing full out as if he were on stage. He would go in there with all that energy, moonwalking, spinning, singing at the top of his lungs, Richie recalled. Of course he'd be drenched in sweat. The man worked harder than anyone I'd ever seen. But after a while, he got smelly. And Quincy wasn't going to let him off easy. Richie chuckled as he painted the picture. Imagine Quincy Jones, with that deep voice, just shaking his head, saying, "Michael, you smelly." And Michael just laughing like a little kid. The nickname became a badge of honor. It wasn't just about hygiene, it was about passion, effort, and the raw funkiness of the music they were creating. Smelly is a term of endearment. For Jackson, being called smelly by Quincy Jones wasn't an insult, it was a strange kind of compliment. Jones was a father figure to Michael, guiding him through the pressure cooker of pop superstardom. Richie emphasized that the name reflected not mockery but intimacy. That was Quincy's way of saying he loved Michael's energy, Richie explained. It was a private joke, a word that stayed in the family. In fact, longtime collaborators remember that Jackson himself started signing autographs or studio notes with the word smelly as an inside joke. Even in moments of stress, he leaned into the nickname. Only Quincy could get away with that, Richie said. To Michael, Quincy was untouchable. Whatever Quincy said, it was gospel. Fans react. The human side of a mythical icon. For decades, Michael Jackson has been wrapped in myth and mystery. He was seen as untouchable, otherworldly, a pop deity who floated somewhere between reality and fantasy. That's why stories like Richie's strike such a chord with fans, they reveal the human behind the legend. On social media, fans have responded with amusement and affection. Michael Jackson being called smelly is the cutest thing I've ever heard, one fan wrote. Another added, makes sense. His music was so funky it had to stink. It's a reminder that even the most carefully curated icons carried quirks, jokes, and unpolished moments. Richie and Jackson, brothers in song. Lionel Richie's connection to Michael Jackson runs deeper than anecdotes. The two shared one of the most important musical collaborations in history, writing We Are the World, the 1985 charity single for African famine relief. Richie recalled how even in those intense sessions, Jackson carried his playful vocabulary into the process. When we nailed the chorus, Michael turned to me and said, "Lionel, that's Smelly." Richie laughed, remembering the moment as one of pure joy. Here we were, trying to save the world, and Michael was just glowing with excitement, calling the song, Smelly. That was him, innocent, enthusiastic, and totally unique. Quincy Jones, the master of nicknames. This wasn't the first or last time Quincy Jones gave someone a nickname. Known for his sharp tongue and candid wit, Jones famously referred to Frank Sinatra as Frankie, Ray Charles as Brother Ray, and even once joked that Prince was the short kid with attitude. But Smelly may be his most famous creation, if only because it stuck with the biggest pop star in the world. Quincy had a way of cutting through the tension, Richie said. Michael could be anxious, he could overthink things. Quincy calling him Smelly was his way of grounding Michael, bringing him back to earth. More than a joke, the legacy of Smelly. While it's hilarious to imagine the king of pop carrying such an unglamorous nickname, the story also carries deeper meaning. It speaks to the intensity of Jackson's artistry, the sweat, the exhaustion, and the hours of labor that went into creating timeless music. It also highlights the bond between Jackson, Richie, and Jones. Behind the global hits and platinum plaques, they were just musicians in a room, teasing each other, laughing, and chasing perfection. Michael wasn't this distant superstar to us, Richie said. He was a brother, a friend. And yes, sometimes he was smelly. Conclusion: remembering the funk in the fun. Michael Jackson's life story has been told countless times, through documentaries, biographies, and tabloid headlines. But the Smelly anecdote from Lionel Richie offers something rare, a glimpse of the playful, goofy, very human Michael behind the spotlight. For Richie, it remains one of his favorite memories. The world knew Michael as the king of pop, he said. But to us, in that little studio with Quincy, he was just Smelly. And honestly, I think he loved that more than all the titles. As fans continue to revisit Jackson's music, perhaps they'll hear the tracks a little differently. The grooves of Billie Jean, the swagger of Beat It, the epic grandeur of We Are the World, all born in those sweaty, smelly sessions. Because as Lionel Richie so perfectly summed it up, Michael didn't just make funky music. He made smelly music. And man, did it stink in the best way possible.